We're going to have some fun today. We're going to do a wine battle, a blind tasting competition between the iconic Caymus Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa Valley and a Bordeaux that costs $25 a bottle. A couple quick administrative points. Both of the wines are behind me now. You can see they're in a bag as number 1 and number 2, and there's an evenly filled glass on either side of those bottles. There's also some paper towel at the top of each bottle so that I don't know what the top looks like. These were presented to me, so I have no idea which is which. Also, I paid for these bottles personally. These are not free samples, and I have no bias or skin in the game whatsoever, other than personal curiosity and the desire to create a hopefully interesting video. Based on the price point alone, you might surmise that the Caymus Cabernet will win this battle easily, as it sells for more than 3 times the price of the Bordeaux, which is the 2020 Lilian Ladouys. I will warn you, however, that I suspect that the Lilian Ladouys will be a formidable competitor as it punches well above its $25 price point. In this video, I'm going to briefly introduce both of the competitors, and then we're going to get right into the blind tasting. I'm going to evaluate each of the wines and let you know my thoughts about those wines. After that, we're going to see if I can correctly identify which was which, and then we're going to do the reveal, and I'll give you more reaction at that point. Caymus was founded back in 1972 by Chuck Wagner and his parents. At that time, there were very few wineries in Napa Valley, so they were undoubtedly one of the original pioneers in Napa Valley. Initially, they sold only 250 cases of wine, and they cost only $4.50 per bottle. Even adjusted for the time value of money, today that would be about $33.76 per bottle. Fast forward to today, and Caymus produces about 70,000 cases, or 840,000 bottles annually of its Cabernet Sauvignon. Prices are around $80 per bottle now, so even adjusted for inflation, the wine is much more expensive now than it was when they started out. Caymus does not disclose much information about its winemaking process, but we do know a few things. Number 1, we know that it's at least 75% Cabernet Sauvignon, because by law, if the bottle states Cabernet Sauvignon on the label, it has to be at least 75% Cabernet Sauvignon. We also know that Caymus sources fruit from all over Napa Valley, in particular from 8 of the 16 different appellations, or AVAs, in Napa Valley, some of which are in the mountains and some of which are on the valley floor. And they assemble that fruit and create their blend each year. This blend is made in a style that's approachable and ready to enjoy immediately, so there's no need to age Caymus Cabernet Sauvignon before you enjoy it, but it certainly will last for some years as well if you don't drink it immediately. I was not able to find too many scores or ratings for this 2021 Caymus Cabernet Sauvignon, but I did see that the Wine Spectator gave it a 92-point rating. Now for the underdog, the 2020 Lilian Ladouys. Lilian Ladouys is located on Bordeaux's left bank in Saint-Estèphe. This is a wine that has the Cru Bourgeois Exceptionnel designation, which is the highest of 3 tiers in the Cru Bourgeois hierarchy. This is a wine that's an absolute steal for $25 per bottle. It received favorable scores from critics. This is a wine that matures in 40% new French oak for around 14 to 16 months. This wine is a blend that consists of around 50% Merlot, 45% Cabernet Sauvignon, and there's smaller amounts of Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot as well. This is a wine that definitely keeps improving with some additional bottle age, but due to the relatively high percentage of Merlot, it's one that you can enjoy on the younger side with a healthy decant as well. All right, now it's time to taste these wines. I put the glass of wine number 1 on my left, and wine number 2 is on my right. Normally I would spend a little bit of time analyzing the color of the wines, but since they're both Bordeaux varietals and they're about the same age, here that would be a waste of time and it wouldn't really be that informative. So we're going to move on, and I'm going to nose these wines and then give them a taste and try to analyze the descriptors, the acidity, the tannins, and the balance. So this is wine number 1. So immediately I can smell some sweet ripe fruit. It's definitely more of a black fruit profile. I would say blackberry, maybe a little black currant. There's also definitely some oak influence on this wine. I get a little bit of like sawdust, cedar, oak, vanilla. So on the palate, the wine is very consistent with the aromatics. Definitely darker fruit, consistent with what I described earlier. The fruit is definitely extremely sweet, and there's a little bit of a cloying aftertaste on the finish. I'm also getting a little bit of cocoa or mocha, that sort of thing. A little bit of hints of chocolate. I'm not really getting a lot in terms of grippy tannins, so the tannins are definitely more smooth. To evaluate acidity for a wine, what you typically do is you'll put the wine in your mouth, and then you'll put your head down like that, and then see if the side of your mouth will start watering. The more your mouth starts watering, the higher the acidity. So if you try that with a German Riesling, something of that nature, your mouth will be watering profusely. But if it's a wine that has less acidity, you won't have much of that mouth-watering sensation, or at least not nearly as much as you would with a higher acid wine, such as a Riesling or a Chenin Blanc. So here the acidity is not super high. I would say maybe medium. And in terms of the finish is also somewhat short. I would say maybe 10 to 15 seconds, which is not a particularly long finish. And when you're analyzing the finish, you focus only on those favorable characteristics. If you have kind of a lingering, bitter, nasty aftertaste, you don't keep counting at that point. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. So to summarize, I think wine number 1 is a good wine. It has primary descriptors and secondary descriptors associated with oak aging, such as the mocha, the coffee, the oak and vanilla, and so forth. In terms of acidity, it's probably a little bit low. The tannins are maybe medium, medium plus, and those tannins are definitely smooth and polished in terms of their nature. They're not grippy whatsoever. The finish is a little bit short for this wine. I would describe it as maybe 10 to 15 seconds or so. So let's go to wine number 2. So I'm definitely getting a dark fruit profile with this one too. Definitely some black currant, black plum, blackberry. There's definitely a little bit of oak detected, but it's not quite as prominent as the oak descriptors, the secondary characteristics for wine number 1. So I'm getting a little bit of spiciness. This wine has a little bit more intensity, a little bit more concentration. There's a little bit more grip or bite to the tannins. The fruit profile is definitely not quite as sweet. There's certainly no cloying aftertaste on this wine. So on this one, I'm definitely getting more acidity. I would describe the acidity as probably at least medium plus. There's a little bit more liveliness on the palate to this wine. Definitely, as mentioned, the tannins are a little bit more grippy as well, although they aren't overly grippy. It's not like you're drinking a young Nebbiolo or something of that nature. The finish is definitely longer. This wine also has a bit more earthiness. It's a bit more dark and brooding in nature than wine number 1. So I actually got an idea to use a stopwatch and time the length of the finish for this wine number 2. And so I did that off camera to avoid boring you to death. And this wine number 2 came in at an impressive 30 seconds, which is actually quite good. I would say 15 seconds is maybe mediocre or average for a wine, but certainly if you get to around the 30-second mark, you're talking about a wine that's quite good. And the other thing I like about this wine number 2 is that the finish is definitely not cloyingly sweet, and not only is it a little bit longer, but it seems to have a little bit more brightness and acidity to it. So just to make sure we're keeping everything even, I went back and did the stopwatch test with wine number 1, and I actually did determine that the finish was a little bit closer to 15 to 20 seconds, and not in the 10 to 15 second range, as I speculated when I wasn't using the stopwatch. So when I'm comparing wine number 1 and wine number 2, I definitely think that wine number 2 is the superior wine. Wine number 2 definitely has more intensity and concentration in terms of the flavor profile than wine number 1. Wine number 2 definitely had a longer, more complex finish than wine number 1, and was a little bit more balanced due to the higher acidity levels than wine number 1. I also thought wine number 2 was more enjoyable because wine number 1 had a little bit of a chalky finish and a cloyingly sweet finish, a bit like when you take Robitussin, whereas wine number 2 didn't have that cloying sweetness. The fruit was ripe, but it was not at all cloying or overly done. And so the finish was a little bit more clean, and again, also much longer than the finish for wine number 1. The other thing I'll say is that wine number 2 definitely has more aging potential, as it has both higher acidity and the tannins are a little bit more grippy and it has more tannic structure. So if I had to guess what these wines are, I'm quite certain that wine number 1 is the Caymus Cabernet Sauvignon and wine number 2 is the Lilian Ladouys. But let's take a look. Okay, we're ready to open wine number 1, and as you can see, I can't even see the top here, so we have to remove that before we can find out which wine this is. And sure enough, wine number 1 is the Caymus Cabernet Sauvignon, as expected. With respect to what gave it away, it was definitely the sweetness of the fruit and the amount of the oak. That was definitely a dead giveaway for that wine. And then here's wine number 2. This is the Lilian Ladouys 2020. So really an excellent wine. You really can't go wrong at all with this wine for $25 a bottle. And in fact, the 2023 futures are on sale for only $19 a bottle now. So that's an even better buy. If you'd like me to do more tasting videos like this one, please let me know in the comments below. And if you're interested in more wine recommendations for outstanding wines that cost only around $25 a bottle, please be sure to check out this video that's linked above.